The South African Local Government Association SALGA has meanwhile called on municipalities which paid more than R1 billion to consultants for financial reporting to pay back the money or face the wrath of the law. The association said in a statement that municipalities across the country have paid more than R1.2 billion to consultants which they hired to audit their books before they were sent to the Office of the Auditor-General. This despite municipalities having appointed chief financial officers or chartered accountants for the similar job. Khomotso Letsatsi is the Chief Officer, Municipal Finance at SALGA. She joins us now. A very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm wondering, you've been watching some of these reports that we've been bringing to our viewers, that of sewage leakage and of a lack of proper sanitation infrastructure. So when you juxtapose that with this, paying R1.2 billion to consultants, what comes to your mind?
So definitely local government, we've got quite a number of challenges, and especially around infrastructure backlog, but maybe answering directly the issue around the utilization of consultants. And I think the AG has basically unpacked it in detail, wherein I think 68% of those municipalities that basically utilized consultants was due to lack of skills, and about 30% was basically due to lack of skills and vacancies, and only about 2% has basically been due to vacancies. So we know that in some municipalities there's been challenges over the years in terms of filling those vacancies, and especially in the finance units, as reflected by the AG's report. But what we are saying as SALGA, that out of that entire money where consultants were utilized, obviously where there's home bodies and the municipalities incurring expenses with regard to paying those salaries, it's actually unacceptable to basically utilize consultants in terms of just putting together financial statements. Of course, for complex transactions, it's understandable that in certain instances, municipalities would basically require to bring in consultants if they don't have those skills.
So there are two things you say. Of course, for complex tasks, it's understandable, but as I mentioned earlier on, that some of these municipalities do have the requisite skills. So then what would justify hiring consultants for this? But also you have written 43 letters to some of the municipalities. So that means that to your mind that there is a reason to believe that there is irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure here.
So no, definitely, and I think the AG's report is very clear in terms of the issues around unauthorized, irregular and fruitless expenditure. And what we do as SALGA, is that if you look at our response from 2018-19, that despite the fact that there's sufficient capacity building programs in place, either by SALGA, National Treasury, Provincial Treasuries and COGTAs, is that there is a need to ensure that there's consequence management and extracting accountability. And we've seen in municipalities where there's basically leadership and there's institutional memory in terms of the leadership having been in place for a longer period of time, they've actually have far much more favorable audit outcomes as opposed to in municipalities where they're basically pretty much a bit unstable in that particular regard. But also what is actually very clear coming out of the AG's report as well is the fact that 17 of the municipalities, which constitute about 17% of the money that has basically been spent towards consultancy, those consultants have actually not delivered in terms of their mandate. So it means they've been paid for the work that was basically not done, which is basically in transgression with the MFMA around the issues in terms of value for money, where public funds are basically utilized. And that's where our NEC basically took a decision to say that those related incidences must actually be referred by the AG to law enforcement agencies and must actually report back to the NEC of SALGA in terms of the progress, so that those that are actually responsible can then be held accountable, and councils must actually extract accountability.
Let's talk about those who could be responsible. Is it deliberate flouting of PFMA regulations and regulations for accounting officers? Because you have alluded yourself that there could be nefarious intents, that it's a money-making scheme. And some of these, surely they are repeat offenders. So
No,
where's
definitely.
the law? That's basically what I'm asking.
So if you're going to pay a service provider for work not having been done, that's deliberately flouting and transgressing the legislation. I mean, I think that we should just call it out basically for what it is. And hence our insistence as SALGA in terms of making sure that there's basically a follow through and those individuals are basically brought to book. And the legislation does provide for that, provides for council to basically oversee towards such activities. But over and above that, the independent aspect of it actually comes where in the AG has basically been empowered as well to independently refer those matters to law enforcement agencies where there's incidences of wrongdoing. If there's clear criminality and fraud, I think the legislation provides sufficient processes that should then be undertaken by councils.
All right. So by when do you expect action to have been taken, and where's the highest you can go in reporting this malfeasance?
So what I'm aware is that the AG would basically be issuing certificate of debts to accounting officers for those municipalities that are basically affected, and as well that you would be aware that there's 2 sets of audits that was basically undertaken by the AG. So it's your normal annual audit as well as the special report that basically deals with covered funds. And those matters where there's clear irregularities, those matters have basically been referred to the SIU as well to basically investigate further. So we'll be watching that process very closely. So my take is that the ball is already running in that particular aspect. But however, SALGA as well, we would then follow up with our members. We have issued letters. We'll continue to issue letters in terms of the additional municipalities where we have to communicate directly with mayors in terms of the actions that then need to be taken.
But do you have a deadline? We're moving towards another financial year end, so surely we can't have a self-perpetuating cycle.
So in terms of our own processes internally, I can't speak for the AG, nor for the SIU. But in terms of our own processes within SALGA, so normally what we'll then do is to provide the municipality about 30 to 60 days to basically respond and provide us with comprehensive audit plans in terms of how they will then be responding to the findings of the AG. But also that actually also informs our own capacity building programs where there's interventions that are required, so that then we then have a targeted approach in terms of the requirements in any of the specific municipalities.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Khomotso Letsatsi, Chief Officer of Municipal Finance at SALGA.